What's up, welcome back to Nowstalgia. Dave here with a review of the Chinese historical drama film Dead to Rights. This film came out back in China, towards the end of July and has been a massive hit, grossing, about 350 million so far, almost exclusively, of course, in China. And this film, in fact, is the follow-up film from director Shen Oh. Shen Oh, 2 years ago, directed No More Bets, a movie I liked quite a bit and have previously reviewed. Check that out if you missed it. Now he's back with Dead to Rights, and this film is a much more ambitious film because it's an historical drama film specifically set during World War II, specifically in 1937 Nanjing during the Nanjing Massacre, which is incredibly dark and serious subject matter to portray on screen. I, of course, like to try and see some of the big Chinese blockbusters that do get a limited release here in the States. I'm lucky enough to live in an area where any of those movies that do get a small release will be playing by me. Of course, separate from that would be something like Ne Zha 2, which is set ungodly amount of records, the highest grossing movie of the year thus far. That got a pretty substantially large release here in the States, a few months ago, and actually just got a English language release as well. I think that's perhaps the first of its kind in terms of a Chinese film being dubbed in English and re-released a second time here, right? It's definitely a sign of where things are. And the Nanjing Massacre, that's been portrayed a few times in some films, but I don't think it's ever been portrayed at like a budget level, at a just a filmmaking style the way it has with this new film here. And while the characters portrayed in this film and the general story you're seeing is fictional regarding a group of civilians surviving the massacre in and around a photo studio, it is tangentially related to some things that did happen during the massacre. The star of the film is Liu Haoran, who's a pretty big Chinese actor from the Detective Chinatown films. But yeah, this is a movie that I thought was really well done. The Chinese blockbuster film Dead to Rights is a very successful historical drama film portraying the Nanjing Massacre in 1937 as hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and non-combatants were killed by the Japanese army during the early years of World War II. This is incredibly heavy and sensitive subject matter that is still a big deal to this day, and this film does not shy away from showing the tragedy, the savagery that was on display. This movie is graphic, this movie is dark, this movie is bleak. There's a lot of death to this movie, and it's a tough sit, but I think it's a very well done film. It's not super sensationalized or anything like that. You get wrapped up with this ensemble of characters and their relationships with each other as they have different means of trying to survive this horror that they find themselves in. And despite being a very long movie at 2.5 hours long, the tension is really built up, and I think the movie has a really nice plotting to it. The production design is also quite impressive, whether it's the photo studio sets or other locations in the destroyed city. It's a really engaging film. This is something, the Nanjing Massacre, the rape of Nanking, this is something that I learned about, growing up, learning about history, but, learning about World War II, in the States, even as someone who, has a history degree now as well. It's definitely something that you don't spend too much time on, just because obviously we're going to learn about the war from the United States perspective. So a lot of stuff that happened in the 30s before the US was involved, you kind of learn about the headlines, but you don't really drill down too much. So it's something that obviously I knew was super tragic, and there was so much death and all that, but that's kind of all I knew about it. I didn't really know too much more. But this film, I think, does a really good job of showing you exactly what was going on, whether you had any knowledge going in or not, right? I mean, widespread rape, widespread murder and torture, men, women, children, young, old, didn't matter, right? I mean, this is war crimes galore. That's what was going on over a few weeks, few months, depending on when exactly that period was. And I think the film does a really good job of kind of showing you that early despair as you watch the city fall, which I think is really impressively filmed. And then actually even getting that mindset, right, of how could the Japanese lose? That was a line said a few times in this film, but the seemingly inescapable power and strength of the Japanese army, it's really communicated well, I think, in this film. It's depicting the stages of the second Sino-Japanese War, right? So in the backdrop, the history is like really well in there. But man, like it's a character film at the end of the day. And like, yes, does it get a bit melodramatic? Does it get a bit, over the top, I guess, with some of those swells? Sure. But I think you're kind of cool with it, right? Because you're spending so much time with these characters and you're like on pins and needles seeing if they're going to make it out. And as you watch the film, you have a sense that most, if not all, of the people you're watching are not going to make it out just because of how the odds are stacked against them. And I won't spoil exactly who lives or who dies with that, but I think things are paid off and done quite well. And the concept of, loyalty to the state versus loyalty to yourself and your family, surviving by any means necessary, what it means to sacrifice. A lot of those nuances and gray areas are a big part of this film as well. I like their lead, A Chang, played by Liu Haoran, just because he's this guy who is a postman, a mail carrier who can't escape the impending, invasion. And by pure luck and happenstance, able to survive by being mistaken for someone who works at the photo studio. And he gets to survive by developing photos for the young Japanese Ito. He's like a lieutenant of some kind, but he's a photographer for the army, coming from money, young, trying to get his respect in his own way, right? And he doesn't actually know how to develop the photos he's taking. And of course, we meet a bunch of other characters. A Chang meets this family that actually owned the photo studio, hiding out in their cellar. And that's how he learns to develop photos. Of course, he didn't have those skills himself. I think all of that's like really good. It's kind of like classic like movie trope in terms of like learning that to keep the momentum. But the movie, like every few times in each act, it's like it's gonna really hit you over the head with like, no, things are super bad. Like you're not getting out of this. Like you just watch a lot of like bad things happen. Like it's just they're not gonna hide it from you. I think that's smart. Like the movie shouldn't like shy away from the brutality. I didn't have a problem with that. I will say towards the end there is a situation where we lose two characters we knew, and that is a particularly gutting thing because of how the movie's setting you up with those characters, and then to see them not survive was, I think, particularly gutting and well done. Obviously, with Chinese films, you talk about sometimes like the influence of like, overtly patriotic like sentimentality and things like that. We talk about that a lot with any kind of Chinese film that has any kind of message, right? And I've reviewed a bunch of them. And I think with this one, like, yes, like there's definitely like a patriotic lean towards the end, especially when like we see the Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal, right? Where we watch the generals in charge of this, onslaught get killed for their, what they're responsible for. It makes sense that you see something like that. I will say though, I think the movie doesn't really portray the Japanese people as like entirely one note. Like obviously they're portrayed as villains because in the situation they were villains. But I think the Ito character and like his lean between like being a like leader and master of these like subservient Chinese people working for him, but also trying to thread the needle with the chain of command at the army that doesn't really respect him. I think that's done pretty well. It's definitely one of those movies that like you're going to watch it once, you don't want to watch it a second time. But I thought the plotting was pretty good, and maybe you get a little numb, you're a little desensitized to watching all these bad things happen a lot. But the various characters that you meet, I think all of them serve a pretty important purpose for the most part. And I just really like the different perspectives you're kind of seeing in this found family out of survival need, that we spend all our time with in the film. And in theory, this could be a foreign film that would travel well. Obviously it's not for everyone given all the violence, but I think it's a pretty universal story to watch. So I'm not expecting this to be a massive hit. It's just been in limited release here in the States for a few weeks. I think that's where it'll end. But nonetheless, I really recommend the film. I think where the film starts to like really sing and like take it up a notch is where you see all these, civilians that we know, and they've been developing all these photos from Ito, and a lot of his photos are of blatant war crimes, severed heads and like dead people and people literally being stabbed and all kinds of things that are not pleasant, right? And they understand that they can use these negatives of these photos and they can tell a story of what's happened here to make sure people understand. And obviously that didn't actually happen this way as the movie portrays, but that is a thing that happened with people, smuggling out negatives from this massacre to show the world what had happened. And I think once that becomes a motivation for the characters to stick it out and develop these photos for the greater good, I think that's what the movie really, really picks it up. And on the other side of things, the Japanese side with Ito, the concept of propaganda and how best to wield it is also, I think, portrayed pretty well as well. So yeah, Dead to Rights, I like the movie quite a bit. Not for everyone, but I really recommend it. Let me know though, what did you think of the film if you've seen it? What did you like most about it? And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.